We're talking about the clashes, the escalating clashes in the Middle East, Israel and the Palestinians. And I want to start by talking about this idea of the Israeli occupation. This has become part of the standard rhetoric. Israel is a colonial power, and they are occupying Palestine. And this, of course, raises the fundamental question, who does this land belong to? Now, I don't claim that that's an easy question to answer, but I do dispute the idea that the left is answering it as if it were an easy question to answer. The Israelis, of course, are the occupiers. The Palestinians own the land. And my question is, how do they own the land? Let's start with something that begins in our own country. America. We keep hearing from the left that America belongs to the American Indians. Why? Because they are its original inhabitants. Because they are its original inhabitants, they have the title deeds to the land. Now, this to me is by itself a little problematic. I mean, does the first Bedouin who gets to an oasis own the oasis? Does he have the right to say, I came here first, so all the water on the oasis, all the land belongs to me? What if three other Bedouins show up and they not only claim an equivalent right to drink out of the oasis and to use the land, but they have better ideas for what to do with the land and how to develop the oasis? So I don't think it is an obvious question, but for the left it is. Oh yes, we took this land from the Indians. Well, if the original occupants have the title deeds to a piece of land, and by that exact same logic, the Jews, the Israelites, own all that land. Why? They were there first. Let's follow the history of this for a moment. This was Jewish land. Now in 70 AD, with the destruction of the temple, the Jews were thrown out. There was the Jewish diaspora, Jews scattered all over the world. That land was occupied by different types of people under different regimes. Eventually, Islam came along. Let's remember that the Roman colonizers were replaced by the Islamic colonizers. And that's how we got Muslims on that land. But there never was a state of Palestine. There were just Muslim farmers and sheep herders and so on that land. And then in 1948, this is after the Ottoman Empire, of course, collapsed, and the British, in a sense, were controlling that territory. The British decided, in a sense, to create the State of Israel, to partition the land, to give some of it to the Jews, some of it to the Palestinians. And the Palestinians said no deal. The Jews accepted it. The Palestinians said no. And this is what created the State of Israel, but under tense conditions. There was the 48 war, and then there was the 1967 war, and it's in the 1967 war, by the way, a war initiated by Arab and Muslim states against Israel, an attack from the outside involving a number of Arab countries, but Israel, kind of miraculously, I think we would say, won that war, and that's how the West Bank and Gaza fell under Israeli control. Now, interestingly, today, there are separate authorities ruling the West Bank and Gaza. The West Bank is controlled by the Palestinian Authority. This is Abbas. This is the old legacy of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. Gaza is controlled by a completely different group, a rival group, Hamas. And Hamas, I think it is accurately described as a terrorist operation, terrorist in its tactics, terrorist in how it chooses to fight. And there's a rivalry between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. That is part of the backdrop of what is going on here. Now, come back to America, where we keep hearing in the media and so on that the Palestinians believe this and the Palestinians believe that, and the Muslims believe this and the Muslims believe that. But of course, everything has changed in the Middle East, and everything has changed in the Middle East because of Trump. What Trump basically did was he reconfigured the power structure in the Middle East. He found, when he made a few phone calls, as it turns out, that a lot of these other countries, Jordan, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, all these countries, they do care about the Palestinians, but they don't care all that much. They're a little bit annoyed that these people ultimately have proved to be impossible to please. The Israelis have made offer after offer. The Palestinians, no deal, no deal. We want to lob bombs into you. So these other Muslim countries are like, forget about that. We can have separate, independent dealings with Israel. So every time we keep hearing Rashida Tlaib and so on talk about the Muslims, she's forgetting that the Muslims in the Middle East don't agree with her. In fact, I ask you right now, where is the big uproar coming out of Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Rabat, Khartoum, or Amman over any of this? Those countries, you notice, those capitals are dead silent. The bottom line of it is that Israel has good dealings with all those people. The Palestinians are fighting their own fight. And there's a big pretense that in fact, John Kerry at one time said, you can't resolve anything in the Middle East without the Palestinians. Well, Trump proved you could. And he did. And in fact, it seems to me this is the key to why the Democratic Party has shifted into such an anti-Israel stance. Part of it, of course, is the fact that the progressives have now come to power in the Democratic Party. They've pushed out the old centrists in the Democratic Party. That's part of it. So you've got these radicals like Rashida Tlaib and AOC and Ilhan Omar, and they're driving the agenda. But here's the other factor. In the last 4 years, the Democrats have gone into kind of a reflexive stance. If Trump is for it, we gotta be against it. So Trump was, of course, full-throatedly, unequivocally pro-Israel. So Democrats go, Israel must be horrible. And so what we've seen is a shift in American politics in which the Democratic Party, which always was fairly pro-Israel, has now become increasingly anti-Israel. And that is the politics driving this dispute. The bottom line of it is I hope that Israel is triumphant, not only for strategic reasons, not only for religious reasons, but also for moral reasons, because at the end of the day, Israel is a decent, democratic society that respects religious diversity and human rights, and the radical Muslims do not.